If you've been into blues, rock, or even pop for a while, there's a good chance you've started to get curious about jazz. And that's probably because you want to add that smooth, sophisticated touch, the kind of sound that instantly makes your playing feel deeper, more colorful, and just a little bit more interesting. And when most players reach that point, they get the same advice. Start with Autumn Leaves. But here's the truth, Autumn Leaves is actually a pretty challenging tune for a beginner jazz guitarist. It's a rare A-A-B-C structure that moves between major and minor. And before long, you're lost in a strange form with unique harmony that feels miles away from the music you're already used to. But Little Wing is the absolute best song to explore jazz. It already has the smooth chord movements, expressive phrasing, and colorful harmony that makes jazz so special. But it has all of that in a way that feels familiar to blues and rock players. So in this lesson, I'll show you how to jazz up Little Wing using the same triads and techniques you've already learned. And by the end, you'll understand 3 simple jazz ideas you can start using right away, not just in Little Wing, but in any blues or rock tune you already play. First, we'll look at how you could turn your basic triads into those rich, colorful jazz chords. Then I'll show you how a few simple chromatic notes and enclosures can make your lines flow smoother. That's where the jazzy feel really starts to show up. And finally, we'll add a few chord substitutions that can enhance both your rhythm and lead playing, giving you that mature, connected sound without making things complicated. So our first step is to take the chords in Little Wing and expand them beyond the triads. The idea here is that every chord you already play has extra notes hiding inside of it, notes you can use to bring out new textures and emotions. You're probably already familiar with this concept, although you may not know it yet. For example, you probably already know that you can go from playing a simple E power chord to a full E minor chord. And you're not really doing anything special, you're just filling out that power chord to make a full chord. In this case, we're just adding one note, and that is the minor third. And if you want to follow along with this lesson a bit more efficiently, I created a PDF you can download for free, link below. So if we take that same idea, E power chord to E minor chord, we can expand it further. That E minor chord can become an E minor 7. And that E minor 7 chord can easily become an E minor 9. Again, we're not doing anything fancy here. These are just different forms of a regular E minor chord. And we can do the same process with the entire chord progression. Our G major becomes a G major 7. Our A minor becomes an A minor 7, or even an A minor 9. Similar to our E minor 7 and E minor 9. For our B minor and our B flat minor, we'll keep it very simple. We'll just go with B minor 7 to B flat 7. And when we get to A, we'll go back to our A minor 9. And in this last little bit, we'll get even spicier. We can play a C major triad or a C major 7, but we're actually going to turn this into a C major 7 sharp 11. And we'll do the same thing for our F major. We'll turn that into an F major 7 sharp 11. And finally, for our D major, we're going to play a D dominant 7 chord. And when we put all of those chords together in the progression, it now sounds like this. Now I know a lot of you are probably wondering how I knew to use a major 7 sharp 11 or why I decided to make the D major a D dominant 7. Honestly, it's a little bit too much to explain in this shorter video, but there's a full course about Little Wing over at Clarity Guitar Studio where I break things down much slower and even more detail, and that's linked below. But the really cool thing about using these nice jazzy shapes is that we can easily translate them from a jazzy sound to an R&B or a neo-soul type sound by just adding some of these Jimi Hendrix style trills and flourishes. And that transforms Little Wing from a rock song to a jazz song and now an R&B or neo-soul song. So now that we've expanded the chords and given the harmony some color, the next step is to make our lines just as smooth. And this is where chromatic notes and enclosures come in. Jazz teachers make this way more complicated than it needs to be. You'll hear phrases like half-step approach from below, upper neighbor tone, enclosure from above and below. And before long, it starts to sound more like a honey to-do list instead of musical ideas. Actually, that reminds me, my wife has been asking me for the last 2 weeks to put down the new rug. But anyway. Here's the simple explanation for chromatic notes and enclosures. We're just taking a note or a few notes that lead into the chord tones. That's it. So look, we have this E minor triad moving to this G major triad. And as you can see, from here to here, there's one note in between. So this becomes this. And if we take it up the octave and play it as just a single note lines, it sounds like this. Or if we go from the C major to the G major, this type of sound. Now we're just going to target this note right here, the root note G. And we're going to play some notes around it before we get there. So it'll sound like this. And that's an enclosure. So if we apply those approach tones and enclosure ideas to Little Wing, we now get something like this. So in step number 1, we expanded each chord to make the harmony richer. Then in step number 2, we made the connection between each one of those chords smoother with chromatic tones and enclosures. And now in step 3, we're going to take one step further by adding a few chords into the progression that are usually not found in Little Wing. Now there are so many different types of chords and substitutions we could explore, but the simplest and one of the most effective is called a diminished passing chord. The basic idea is that you can take a diminished chord and put it right before your target chord to smooth out the transition. If you think back to our last idea, adding in a chromatic tone before getting to the target to connect the line, remember it was this. If we take that same idea, that's basically the same thing as a diminished passing chord. The only difference is that instead of using a single note, we're using an entire chord. And what's great about this is that you can use it almost anywhere in almost any genre of music. If we're playing it as full chords, it will sound like this. And if we're playing it as a single note idea, it'll sound like this. By the way, before we go any further, I just want to comment on some pretty common guitar advice you've probably heard before. People say things like, you should never play a scale or arpeggio straight up or straight down because it's not musical. Yeah, that is nonsense. Now, of course, you don't want to spend all of your time playing scales straight up and down, but I've analyzed some really great players like Josh Smith, Robin Ford, Joe Pass, and I've seen all of them play scales or arpeggios straight up or straight down in a line. And as you can hear from our lick example, We just took this simple diminished arpeggio, played it straight down, and it sounded really awesome. Okay, Bonnie is gone, so we're going to turn off the Bonnie cam now. So we're going to get a lot of use out of this one diminished idea. First, we're going to put it right before the A minor. And then when we get towards the end of the song, we're going to use it in 2 more spots. And we're going to use this to really smooth out the bass motion and give the progression a nice flavor. So we're going to go from C major to C sharp diminished to D sharp diminished, and then we're going to conclude on E minor, which restarts the tune. So when we apply all of that, plus some of the other ideas we discussed today, we get a progression that sounds like this. So just because you're interested in smooth playing and nailing the changes, that doesn't mean you need to trade out your electric guitar and go buy an arch top and become a jazz guy. You could just take these different jazz ideas, you can learn them well, and then you can apply it to all of your other rock and blues songs as well. And if you like this style of teaching and want to go deeper, start your free trial at Clarity Guitar Studio, link below. Oh, and just so you know, I'm not just a cat lover. If any animal, a dog, a raccoon, a skunk, if it shows up at my house and gives me love, I will adopt it and take care of it. That's just the type of guy I am.